Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to Illinois Rising. My name's John Tillman. I'm the CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute, and Dan Proft is off today at an undisclosed location having a good time. That means I'm going to be driving the car. We're going to try to stay out of the ditch. And with me today, hoping that's true, is Kristen McQueary from the Chicago Tribune editorial board. Kristen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Well, it's very exciting also to have with us someone who was in Springfield this past week on Wednesday when Speaker Mike Madigan lost a very important vote and the taxpayers won. From Downers Grove, State Representative Ron Sandek. Ron, welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here, John. Hi, Kristen.
Hi.
So, Representative Sandek, give the people who are listening a little feel for what happened when Speaker Madigan, the almighty Madigan, who has controlled this state for 32 of the last 34 years, yet again lost another vote. This is becoming a habit.
Well, I sure hope it's becoming habitual, John. That would be an encouraging sign. And to be sure, the last vote was encouraging, albeit a little mystery-filled, and there were some wacky political games being played. The bottom line is the Speaker's legislation, SB 1229, which was an attempt to usurp some power of the executive, the sole person elected by the taxpayers and voters of Illinois, and really chiefly responsible for turning the state around. Madigan's legislation would have divested the executive with the ability to really negotiate and instead put it in the hands of an unelected arbitrator, but only for 3 years, just in case another Blago or Quinn's elected, of course. And this all surrounds the AFSCME negotiations, which are going on right now, and were going on at the time the legislation was introduced, voted through the legislature and vetoed by the governor. So the override motion failed, and that's a win for taxpayers and a win for the state of Illinois, and yes, something hopefully that occurs more and more down the line.
So, Representative, you know Ken Duncan. He is the lawmaker who was missing from the Democratic side of the aisle, and it looked like, and I'd like your thoughts on this, when they convened, the Republicans announced that you had 4 excused absences. There was nothing said on the Democrat side. Do you think they knew that he was not going to make this vote, or did this really catch Speaker Madigan by surprise?
Really good question. I wish I knew the answer. I can give you my speculation. I think it's the latter, Kristen. Here's what the Democrats have done ever since we continued with what the Speaker has called continuing session. As you know, and people that watch the legislature closely, we were supposed to have concluded our business on May 31st. We didn't. We don't have a budget. The Speaker, not the governor, the Speaker has been calling the House to weekly days of continuing session. So that's been at the Speaker's call, not the governor. Ever since that occurred, so since the beginning of June, the Democrats have failed to announce when excused absences were occurring. We continue, and as you know, we did so this past Wednesday. We advise, the body when members are on personal business or unable to attend for whatever reason, and they are excused, and their absence is explained. The Democrats have not done that since the beginning of continuing session, so no record was made. I will tell you, they had punched in Representative Duncan and Representative Golar, who was not on the floor when we began business. She did come. It's not unusual for perfunctory votes for the Democrats to vote absent members who will soon be there. We were waiting for the right time to verify the roll call. Fortunately or unfortunately, it didn't come until a little bit later, but then it became clear Representative Duncan would not be in attendance, and we knew they only had 70 physical Democrats available to vote on the rest of the matters before us that day.
So what I think is interesting about this, and Representative Duncan not being present, which of course that means they were one short of the supermajority they needed to override, is Eric Zorn, a columnist for the Tribune, the same paper where Kristen works, essentially said that Duncan was a coward. I actually think he was quite courageous not to be there. What was it like on the floor when everybody finally realized he wasn't going to show up, he wasn't going to be there? What was the chatter?
Yeah, a real good question again, John. Here's the thing that people, again, that are close to this world know. For about 2 weeks, the Speaker has been declaring very definitively that he had 71 votes. He also has been saying, a little more slyly, that he believed there would be one or two Republican votes. So having 70 Democrats there and maybe having a few Republican votes or not, the calculus of how this was all going to turn out was still a little bit of a mystery. Now, I believed none on my side of the aisle would push the green button and would agree to the override. I believed there were no Republican votes. I believed that for several days in advance of Wednesday, but it was confirmed in our caucus meeting on Wednesday. What's interesting is, there were two representatives, and one of which who ended up voting no, and one of which who voted present. They were believed to have been the real wild cards in all this. If you believe the speaker after the fact, he claims he had all 71. If Representative Duncan had attended, he expected 71 Democratic votes. I'm still waiting for someone to put that question to Representative Franks and Representative Drury if that's true, because the chatter on the floor, John, was that once they didn't have 70, those two felt relieved and free to then vote maybe their conscience or their district, but not according to plan.
Right.
And speculation.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing there, Representative Sandek, is that both in Representative Drury and Frank's district, Governor Rauner won those districts handily. Their constituents largely want fiscal conservatism, even though they're both Democrats. What I think is interesting about all of this, though, is what does it say going forward? So what this means is the governor's still going to be the primary negotiator with the largest government union in the state, AFSCME. He's going to be across the table. He's made it crystal clear that he's going to represent all the taxpayers, not just those that have normally been represented in these negotiations in the past. What do you think this means in terms of his leverage with them? And how could this bleed over and create some leverage for him in the budget negotiations while we still have the ongoing budget impasse?
Well, I think because of this legislation, anyone that thought it through would understand that AFSCME really wasn't negotiated in good faith for the last 3 weeks to a month, because they've been waiting on this legislation and this supposed override, and they spent all of their time and political currency in that endeavor. It failed. So they're now going to either, their choices are pretty simple, John. They're either going to negotiate in good faith, or they're not, or that I guess one's a subset of the other. They can go on strike after September 30, because there's a tolling agreement that exists right now. For all the people that have demonized this governor as some union buster, he signed a contract with 4,000 plus Teamsters, or the Teamster organization that represents 4,000 state employees, and he's entered into two tolling agreements. AFSCME's contract expired many months ago, and he's agreed not to lock them out. They've agreed not to strike. They're getting paid as if the contract that expired were still in existence. So for all the, I think, really mean-spirited, easily coined union buster or mean-spirited big bully governor stuff, he's actually demonstrated great measure.
I think that's something
he will continue to.
I think that's excuse me, sorry, Representative. I think that's something that got lost in this debate. Was really, we got really in the weeds on when an impasse could be declared and who could make a final offer. When really, if you look at what the governor has proposed to AFSCME, it's very reasonable. I mean, he's actually just trying to infuse some sanity in state government.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it, Kristen? He's trying to say, guys, I think you have to work 40 hours rather than 37 in order to get overtime. I think a pay freeze, given the amount of increases, step, internal increases, and overall contractual increases that have occurred over the last 10 years, given the state's fiscal status, I think a pay freeze makes sense.
I think they're very reasonable.
Yeah, of course they are. And the Teamsters understood that, and they signed a contract in accordance with that general mindset. AFSCME has had their way for a long time, Kristen, a real long time.
Well, they have
their way.
The AFSCME allies have had monopoly control of government and the political and policy narrative in the state for a while, and that is all changing now for a host of reasons. But I think going back to what's reasonable, the ask was 11 to 29% salary increases, 5 weeks of vacation, a lesser cost on their health care. And one of the things that the union representatives always do is they talk about, we're trying to protect the middle class. Let's be clear about that. They're trying to protect government unionized middle class workers. And of course, this is not the individual worker in the union's fault. This is their union bosses and their allies in the legislature and government that are Democrats primarily. There are some Republicans that are sympathetic. But this is versus private sector middle class taxpayers who are getting hammered and have had an average increase of around 2.5%, something like that, percent over the last few years themselves. So they're the ones who would pay for these increases. And so what the governor's trying to do is balance out the interests.
Exactly. And he's done it, and frankly, John, in a balanced and measured way. And despite some of the crazy over-the-top rhetoric, the objective record indicates someone who's negotiated in good faith, who got a deal done with the Teamsters, who had 2 tolling agreements with AFSCME, and who needs to maintain his authority granted to him by the taxpayers to do what's best in the overall good for the state, not just AFSCME and their union bosses and their complicitors. And so I think to your question, the governor has leverage to do what he was elected to do there, and I think in a larger sense, he gains more leverage with respect to the governing concept going forward. You know, the Democrats have tried to chip away in a variety of ways at his authority, and what was lost Wednesday, the 1229 theater with Representative Duncan, Golar in and out, would they have the votes? Would Republicans, be there with them? All that aside, that was a huge vote, and I'm glad it worked out the way it did. There were a series of other veto overrides. Some were mandatory veto overrides. Some were total veto overrides.
And on that,
utterly failed.
Right. And Representative Sandak, on that note, I actually have to end there. The good news is that we have competition in Springfield. You're one of the key competitors. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys. Take care.